They jeered when the bride was sold in chains, until a solitary rancher declared, "My boy needs you." The auction block. The dusty town square of Dry Creek reeked of sweat, whiskey, and cruelty. A crooked sign above the wooden platform read "Auction Today." Men gathered like vultures, hats tipped low, spurs jangling, eyes gleaming with mockery. At the center of the stage stood a young woman in chains. Her wrists were bound with iron cuffs, her ankles clamped tight. A crude rope tethered her to the post like cattle. Her dress, once fine, hung torn and dirt-stained. Strands of chestnut hair fell across her pale face, hiding eyes that refused to weep in front of them. Her name was Clara Mayfield. "Look at her," one man jeered, his voice booming with the others' laughter. "Bride in chains, and no groom to claim her." "Who'd want damaged goods like that?" another shouted. The auctioneer smirked, slapping his ledger against his thigh. "Gentlemen, this here's Clara, the runaway bride. Promised herself to a banker in Wichita, then skipped on the wedding. Banker put up a reward for damages. Law says she's got to work off her debt. And today, she's for sale." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara's jaw clenched, but her gaze stayed firm on the horizon. She would not give them the pleasure of seeing her broken. The bidding began low. $5. 10. The numbers crept higher, not out of mercy, but because men liked the sport of ownership. $20. 25. 30. Clara's heart hammered, not from fear of work, but of what kind of man would win her. She prayed, "God, not another brute. Not someone cruel." Then the crowd parted, quieting as a man stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, sunburnt by years under the prairie sky. His hat shadowed his face, but the lines around his mouth spoke of silence rather than laughter. His boots were worn, his coat dusty. Everyone knew him, Elias Turner, the lonely rancher who lived at the far edge of town. Some whispered he'd buried his wife years ago. Others said he was half wild, speaking more to cattle than to men. Elias's gray eyes rose to the platform. He didn't leer. He didn't smirk. He only studied Clara, then lifted his hand. $50, he said in a voice deep and steady. The square went silent. 50, the auctioneer repeated, blinking. A drunk cowboy laughed harshly. "Turner, what in hell you want a chained bride for? You got no use for a woman." The laughter returned, crueler than before. Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer their jeers. Instead, he stepped closer to the stage, eyes never leaving Clara. "My boy needs her," he said simply. The words landed heavier than a gunshot. A hush swept over the crowd. Men shifted uncomfortably, some muttering. Everyone remembered that Elias had a son, just 9 years old. The boy had grown motherless, quiet and withdrawn like his father. No one dared outbid him. "Sold," the auctioneer declared, slamming his ledger. "To Elias Turner, for $50. Chains rattled as Clara was led down the platform. For the first time since dawn, her eyes lifted, meeting the strangers. There was no pity in his gaze, only a quiet steadiness that felt like solid ground beneath her trembling feet. Elias untied the rope from her wrists himself, his touch careful. He didn't speak until they reached his wagon. "You're free to sit in back," he said gruffly. "Ain't far to the ranch." Clara hesitated, watching him climb onto the driver's bench. His boy sat beside him, a thin child with wary eyes. The child stared at her, then quickly looked away. Clara climbed into the wagon, heart racing. She was no longer in chains, but her life had just been sold to a man she did not know. And yet, When Elias Turner had spoken, "My boy needs her," Clara had felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. The lonely rancher's promise. The Turner Ranch lay miles beyond town, spread across rolling grassland under a sky too wide for walls. The wagon creaked along the dirt track, the prairie wind tugging at Clara's torn dress as she sat in the back. She had expected the rancher to speak, to explain why he had bought her, but Elias Turner was a man of few words. He kept his gaze on the road, reins steady in his hands. Beside him sat the boy, Sam, thin as a rail, his eyes peeking at her from under the brim of his hat before darting away like a shy foal. When they reached the ranch, Clara saw a homestead weathered by storms and solitude. The white paint had long peeled from the boards. A barn leaned tiredly to one side. Fences stretched crooked across the fields. It was not wealth or pride that stood here, but endurance. Elias climbed down first. "Come on," he said, voice low. Clara followed, chains gone but still heavy in memory. Sam slipped from the wagon and lingered near the steps, as if uncertain whether to flee or stay. Inside, the house was clean but bare. No lace curtains. No flowers. Just sturdy wood, patched quilts, and silence. "You'll have the spare room," Elias said, nodding toward a small door. "Ain't much, but it's yours." Clara stepped inside. A narrow bed. A single dresser. A wash-basin with water fresh drawn. It was more kindness than she'd known in months. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias only tipped his hat and left her to settle. The days that followed. At dawn, Clara rose to the sound of roosters and the creak of the windmill. She found Elias already in the fields, shoulders bent to labor, and Sam trailing behind, struggling to keep pace with tasks too heavy for him. Without asking, Clara tied up her hair and joined them. She milked the cow, swept the barn, gathered eggs. When Sam dropped a pail, spilling feed across the dirt, she crouched beside him, helping gather it with gentle hands. "No harm done," she murmured. The boy stared at her, then whispered, "Pa says not to waste." "And he's right," Clara smiled. "But everyone spills sometimes." Sam blinked at her, as if uncertain whether to believe such softness was real. By noon, Elias noticed. She worked without complaint, shoulders squared, face calm. He said nothing, but when Sam brought her a tin cup of water, Elias's eyes softened at the sight. At supper that night, Clara ladled stew into bowls. Sam watched her movements with quiet hunger, not just for food, but for the rhythm of a woman's care. When she set a bowl before him, he whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." Clara touched his hair lightly. "You're welcome, Sam." Across the table, Elias's gaze lifted. For the first time, Clara thought she saw something warm flicker in his eyes. The shadows of town. But Dry Creek was not quick to forget. When Elias came into town for supplies, whispers followed. Bought himself a bride in chains. Woman's debt don't vanish, 'cause he paid it. Reckon she'll run same as before. Elias ignored them. He had spent years enduring their talk. But Clara heard the rumors whenever she went with him, and shame burned her cheeks though she had done no wrong. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the fields, Clara stood on the porch, arms wrapped tight. Elias stepped up beside her. "They'll keep talkin'," he said simply. Her throat ached. "Does it not bother you?" He gazed at the horizon. "I don't take stock in folks' words. My boy smiles again when you're near. That's worth more than gossip." Clara turned to him, startled. His face was quiet, almost unreadable, but she heard truth in it. For the first time in years, someone valued her not for beauty or duty, but for what her presence gave another soul. Sam's laughter. Weeks passed. Slowly, Sam's shyness melted. He began leaving small treasures at Clara's door, a feather, a smooth stone, a bundle of wildflowers. She cherished each gift, tucking them into her dresser drawer. One afternoon, she coaxed him into laughter, chasing chickens across the yard until feathers flew and his giggles rang clear. Elias, pausing from mending a fence, looked up in surprise. He had not heard his son laugh so freely since his wife's passing. That night, Elias lingered at the doorway of Clara's room. His voice was gruff, almost hesitant. "You've given him back something I thought gone," he said. Clara's heart thudded. "All children need is care, Elias. He just needed a mother's touch." Their eyes met in the dim light, and for the first time, neither looked away. Storm and fire. The summer storm came sudden and fierce. Thunder cracked the sky open, rain lashing the roof. At midnight, lightning struck the barn. "Fire!" Clara screamed, rushing from her bed. Elias was already outside, hauling water, his face set in grim determination. Sam stood frozen in the doorway, eyes wide with terror. Clara knelt, grasping his shoulders. "Sam, listen to me. We need to save the animals. You're brave, aren't you?" Tears welled, but he nodded. Hand in hand, they ran into the storm, untying panicked horses, driving them to safety. Smoke choked her lungs, sparks searing her dress, but she did not falter. When at last the flames were beaten down, the barn stood blackened but not lost. Elias turned, and saw Clara clutching Sam to her, shielding him with her body. Something inside him broke open. The confession. The next morning, with smoke still rising faint from the barn, Elias found Clara on the porch, sleeves rolled, scrubbing soot from her arms. He stopped, words heavy on his tongue. For years he had spoken little, burying grief with silence. But now, he could not remain quiet. "You saved my boy," he said hoarsely. "And my home. I ain't thanked you proper." Clara looked up, her hair loose around her face. "I didn't do it for thanks, Elias. This place, this family, it feels like the first home I've ever known." He stepped closer, shadows of loneliness deep in his eyes. "When I said at the auction, 'My boy needs you,' I didn't rightly realize how much I needed you too." Her breath caught. The wind rustled between them, carrying the scent of ash and rain. Slowly, she reached for his hand. Rough, calloused fingers met hers. "Then maybe we both were waiting for this," she whispered. A new beginning. By autumn, the ranch no longer felt hollow. Sam ran across the fields with laughter in his voice. Clara's flowers bloomed in jars upon the windowsill. Elias spoke more now, not many words, but enough to show his heart was waking. One evening, beneath the reddening sky, he took her hands and asked quietly, "Clara, will you stay? Not because of debt. Not because I bought your freedom. But because you'll be my wife. Because you'll be Sam's mother." Tears filled her eyes, not of sorrow but of a joy she thought forever lost. "Yes, Elias," she said, voice trembling. "Yes, I'll stay." Sam burst from the doorway, flinging himself into her arms, laughter ringing. Elias wrapped them both in his embrace. And for the first time in years, the lonely rancher was no longer lonely.